Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to all of you. It gives me great pleasure to announce today Near and Middle Eastern Civilization Graduate Student Symposium. I am Leila Moslemi Mehni, the PhD candidate and the organizer for the symposium. I am delighted that the group of graduate students at the NMC have been given the opportunity to host today's symposium. I'd like to thank Dr. Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali, the supporter of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies, and the sponsor for this program. I am also grateful to thank to our mentor, Professor Mohammad Tawakkoli Taghi, whose initial thought guided us in the creation of the graduate student symposium. I would like to extend my thanks to Shabnam, Rahimi Golkhandan, and Sofia Farrohi for supporting the graduate student through this. Before starting, we acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. These presentations are the evolving research of the graduate students, which will be further developed in the future. Our session for today's symposium is moderated by Shabnam Rahimi Golkhandan. Shabnam Rahimi Golkhandan is managing editor for Cinema Iranica and Women Poets Iranica at the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Shabnam Rahimi Golkhandan.
Thank you, Leila Jan, and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. For Canadian ones, this is right before the long weekend, so thank you especially, and also for American colleagues who also going into the July 4th festivities. My name is Shabnam. Thank you, Leila, for the introduction. I will be the moderator of today's panel. You will be hearing from five of our brilliant graduate students who will present you, as Leila said, with the current state of their ongoing research on this timely topic. Now I will introduce each speaker before they speak. And at the end of all 5 presentations, I will open the Q&A section. Please pose your questions, write them in the chat section. That way it's easier for us to make sure all of them are read and answered for our speakers. Again, please keep your microphones off during the presentations. Depending on how many questions we receive, we might be able to actually open the mics at the end of the Q&A section so that you can pose your own questions. One disclaimer, one of our speakers is going to join us a little bit later. She had a little bit of a technical difficulty, Eszter, so we might have to move Eszter to the end of the presentation if she cannot come in time for her spot, the third spot. With that, I would like to welcome Sara Molaie. Sara is a first-year PhD student at the Near Middle Eastern Civilization Department. She received her MA from the University of Washington and wrote her dissertation on the revival of Hebrew and Persian languages in the 19th century. Her current research focuses on the poems of 19th and 20th century Iranian women poets. Sara Jan, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Shabnam, for your kind introduction. As she mentioned, my name is Sara, and I'm one of Professor Tawakkoli Taghi's students, and I'm actually at the end of my first year of PhD. Today, I'm going to talk about Zhen, Zhian, Azadi as a slang. Before we start that, if you don't mind, I'll share my screen. So we would go through it together. So I'm going to talk about the social historical roots of the slogan, Zhen, Zhian, Azadi, or Zan, Zendegi, Azadi. But before we go through our talk about the this chant of Zhen Zindagi Azadi or Zhen Zhian Azadi, I would like to draw our attention to the history of Kurdish women as rebellions. So in late 19th century and early 20th century, through the project of Kurdish nationalism, we have the movement of Kurdish women. However, this Kurdish women rebellion through the process of nationalism, Kurdish nationalism, they were low in numbers. And they were mostly the wives and ladies of the leaders of these, nationalistic project. And in other words, they belong to the elites group. They belong to the more powerful class of the Kurdish community. And like many other nationalist or reformist movement, it was more like a top-down kind of movement that is, recorded at least. And the symbols and in this movement were more like women and feminine symbols and the markers of the boundaries in the construction of a modern, Kurdish identity. However, in late 20th century, around 1970s, we see the Kurdish freedom movement gradually, shapes, and then it goes, all the way to 1980s and later. And out of this Kurdish freedom movement, we see the Kurdish women rebellion again late in the 20th century. This movement, the Kurdish freedom movement, is important in terms of gender composition, bringing the question of women's equality, and in terms of its consequences. I would like to first name the consequences, and then we'll go through, these consequences in more details as far as our time let us, allow us. So this movement was important because it made a huge impact in providing the Kurdish community as well as Kurdish women political mobilization. More importantly, it led to a change or a shift in Kurdish nationalist myth. Because prior to this movement, the nationalist myth among Kurds was more around the figure of Kaveh Ahengar, who was an individual, a masculine figure who sacrificed his life for the love of, his land, his identity, his cultural and ethnic roots. Through this women involvement in the Kurdish freedom movement, through this women active participation, which came out of, it's a movement, women movement out of this freedom movement, we see a gradual shift in the nationalist myth, because from Kaveh, we see that the image of a goddess called, named a Mesopotamian goddess, Eszter, if I pronounce it properly, a goddess of love, of sex, of beauty, of political power, becomes more concentrated in, shaping the mythology, the nationalist myth of the Kurdish people. And this mythological shift, let's say, and the political mobilization really provided the Kurds with a strong historical continuity from prehistoric, times, and, the people of Mesopotamia, let's say, the place. And this connection made a strong connection to the time where women used to be so active in their social life. I would like to concentrate on the importance of the nationalist myth. Why is it important? Because some scholars like Partha Chatterjee, he indicates that the mythic fictions have always been connected to our political program, especially nationalist project or nationalist programs. Other scholars like Denise Kendiati, she explains that nationalist projects have dual roles. Why? First, at one level, or from one side, on one hand, they are trying to shift the society from a traditional lifestyle to a more modern lifestyle. And at the other hand, at the second level, they're trying to resurrect the values and belief of the authentic culture, of the pure culture, the essence of their culture that, you know, the society has. And then at the same time, going back to some kind of, you know, original traditional root. And this dual, you know, feature of nationalist project, and by the way, the resurrection of values happens through the nationalist myth. And this duality within the nationalist project, modernization and going back to the pure, you know, authentic culture, highly open highly a fluid and indeterminate meanings and interpretation, you know, regarding any concepts and terms that is relevant to the project, to the nationalism of any society. Like Deniz Kendiati, we have our prominent scholar of Iranian studies and, you know, the gender studies of Iranian nationalism, Professor Afsaneh Najmabadi. In one of her articles, which is written in Persian in the periodical called Mir-Djalali, or the other half, she has an article over there indicating that this is the very quality of at least Iranian nationalism, that the concepts and terms are very much fluid, and it's so easy to misconceptualize, it's so easy to misunderstand what we exactly mean by gender, for example, what we exactly mean by woman, by mother, by father, by any of these terms. So because of this fluidity, we have a huge disadvantage, at least in the case of Iranian nationalism, we have a huge disadvantage against women in the project of nationalism. And this fluidity of concept and interpretation can easily lead to, you know, visibility or invisibility of women. Usually it's invisibility because it's disadvantage of women in a society. Another topic that Professor Najmabadi touches in this regard is the very close association of literature of love and affection. When the project of nationalism is happening, there is a huge production of literature of love and affection. And this is very important because this literature is a tool to define the relation between sexes, sexuality, and subjectivity. Professor Najmabadi indicates that, that this construction, especially, you know, seeing the land like a motherland and defining in the like feminine body, having a feminine body to define the land, indicates that this construction serves to formulate womanhood as a body in need of protection against foreign ambitions, harassment, and rape, thereby assigning nationalism the duty as the gatekeepers of Namus. The construction of the homeland and its women as bodies in need of protection and possession by the nation's men has deepened the difference and inequality between male and female citizens. By the way, this was not a quotation from this was an explanation from another scholar, which I cited here. Back to our discussion on discussion of Kurdish freedom movement. This movement is also important because unlike the early 20th century, which was so limited in numbers, which was more dominated by the elite class, this movement was out of the proletarian class and impoverished people of the Kurdish community. Because there was this thinking that with the advancement of capitalism, the poor and especially minorities like Kurds were getting poorer and suffering from like poverty, financial instability, and other crises, except very few people within, you know, in the among the Kurds. And it was assumed that these people who, I mean, among the Kurds, sorry, this movement was against the mostly in the case of against the government of Turkey, and also the powerful people within the Kurdish community was also assumed, they were assumed to be associated with the state, meaning the Turkish government. So gradually this movement merged with the Turkish Labour Party, and that strengthened the Kurdish freedom movement to the far that they gained political power and they got involved in armed conflicts. And although the armed conflict, one of the civil conflicts was so hazardous that many people were killed and they died, still one of the working party within this within this movement survived. And gradually the political agenda of the movement emphasized or concentrated its emphasis on social equality of all courts, excuse me, and resolved the problem of gender inequality. How it resolved the problem of gender inequality? The very important figure in targeting the problem of gender inequality within the Kurdish freedom movement and the equality and the participation of women in this battle in the freedom of Kurdish freedom of Kurds was Abdullah Öcalan. He was a active and organizer and proposer of this leading this movement, one of the important figures, especially the working one of the working party, and he wrote many writings, but one of his writings is on women and family question, Kedin ve Aile Suruno, in 1992. In that writing, he explicitly criticized the traditional patriarchal family structure and the older definition of namus, as well as the traditional, familiar structure. He explained, he declared that these are the barrier for building a new Kurdish identity. He also redefined the concept of namus. He states, men seek complete dominion in sexuality. Women, on the other hand, use sexuality as their greatest weapon for keeping hold of men. This is where sexuality leads to a dangerous notion of namus. And since this is our fundamental moral norm, it has very dangerous consequences. The homeland is under occupation. The homeland is raped thousands of times, but nothing is done in return. There is another component that he talked about. First of all, he's one of the people who gradually played an important role in the emergence of modern individual and new and in fact a free Kurdishness. And he states that women's liberation is Kurdistan liberation. It is even the men's liberation. Because, sorry, I would take a pause here because he explains, for example, when we are pulling down women, it is very much like the pulling down men as well, because the relation that we are creating between women and men, while the woman is oppressed, and the man is the oppressor, it is very much like the relation that we have with the colonizers and the people we are fighting against. So we have to get rid of this kind of relationship in order to build a new identity and build a new nation. Otherwise, we're not gonna get anywhere with having some strong discrimination within the community itself. So he says women's liberation is Kurdistan's liberation. It is even the men's liberation. It seems to me that men's relation to women is similar to that of an occupier. The level of women's freedom is also the level of society's freedom. That in turn is the country's freedom. So Öcalan's emphasis on the project of the removal of patriarchal barriers had it's gradually resulted in some sort of consequences. One of them was the more active participation and appearance of women in the demonstration. And women took a huge part in the armed conflict. For example, many women, many women were not used to, and even the community it was not used to see women to fight on the mountain in the harsh condition, and it was because it was defined as something merely a masculine kind of job. But with the participation of women in the battlefield and the death of many women in the battlefield for the sake of saving the Kurdish people and peoplehood, the notion of woman and the idea of gender gradually transformed. The deaths of women are very important because not only many women died in those battles, but many women committed to suicide. Some people committed to individual suicide, so they were, like suicide, what we say these days we see. And in this level, it revived the myth of like kaveh, that one individual is, sacrificing life for the love of, people and nation and identity. However, some women went even further. They committed to mass suicide. A woman, especially in particular, many women, especially Zhian, is one of them. And this way they created, people like Zhian, created a new myth other than Kaveh's myth among themselves in the Kurdish community. So in one way, it was added to that layer. So we have a shift gradually from Kaveh to Eszter. As we said, she was a goddess of, love and sex and beauty, political power. But there was another level of, myth being added to that and intensifying the figure of a woman, being in nationalist myth. The mass suicide was the extreme expression of women's, presence in the community, and especially the lamentation when happened at the time of the death of women like her was one of the lamentation, or the common lamentation, was Zhen, Zhian, Azadi. And with this lamentation, it intensified the presence, the role, the part that these women took through this movement for the sake of, the land and the entire Kurdish people. So this mass suicide was along with the purpose, demanding the liberation of women, and it gradually changed the image of women as an oppressed woman to a trustworthy woman, someone who is reliable, to protect like a man. And it gave more political visibility to women and led to having many women running organization, either political organization or very militant or military type of organization by themselves. And more importantly, it called to reorganize the relation between men and women on the basis of equality. Öcalan project also touches on new Kurdish identity, meaning that new man or new woman and new family should be based on the love of land. Öcalan even explains, for example, that the love that is not melted with politics or some sort of political project is not a true love. And this way, he's trying to distract the idea of a political project or myth from women, femininity, and, for example, from the idea of land as a feminine self to the land as itself. One of the essays that was written before the Zan Zendegi Azadi, Women Life Freedom movement, titled as Genealogy from Women's Struggle to Social Liberation. It was written by Neven and Schaffers. It was quoted that in one of his speeches, Öcalan says he created the expression Zhen, Zhian, Azadi, Woman Life Freedom, as an enchanting expression. What is Zhen, Zhian, Azadi directed against? It is directed against the formula of death, sex, and slavery. This here means both physical and mental death. And slavery refers to how the entire society is enslaved through the figure of the woman. Therefore, this formula is not just for Kurdish women, but also for women of other societies. This means that the struggle for a democratic nation and the gender struggle are always waged together. So let's think of Zhen, Zhian, Azadi in modern Iran. Based on the context that we studied, that where this chant is coming from, the huge, history that we have behind this chant, what does it do, in our modern Iran, especially in the movement that we are having right now? At one level, I think it links the past with the future. For example, the death of Mahsa Amini adds another layer to the, national myth, like a death of Zhian that we just discussed. Because, first of all, she's a feminine figure, and also her death revives the emotion and all the sorrows that the Kurdish women went through when they were, fighting in that battle for the Kurdish identity as well as women liberation. Also, at the other level, it indicates or it brings the idea that the battle is still going on. So Mahsa sacrificed herself, her life, for both Kurdish community, but also for Iranian people. So Mahsa sacrificed her because she had a Kurdish background. Of course, it's a Kurdish, loss, but it's a loss in the Kurdish community. But it is a sacrification for Iranian women and also Iranian people against a cruel government. And at the end, this chant, Zhen, Zhian, Azadi, gives the hope, or gives a hope, because the liberation and self-determination of Kurdish women out of the Kurdish freedom movement, the woman life freedom movement assures that it eventually leads the emancipation of Kurdish as well as the Iranian women entirely. That was it. I'm sorry if I couldn't touch more detail because of the, time, and I really appreciate you for listening to my talk.
Thank you very much, Sara John, for sticking to time. I don't like the timekeeping part of the moderation, so I really, really, really especially appreciate it. Now on to our next speaker. Gunha Kim is a finishing second year PhD student studying 20th century Iranian history at the Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations at the University of Toronto. Previously, he studied at Seoul National University, where he earned a bachelor degree in West Asian languages and civilizations and international relations. His current project aims to study the historical development of the discourse of voluntary death, suicide, and martyrdom in 20th century Iran. Gunha, please take over.
Thank you so much, Shabnam, for the introduction. And I'd like to share some of my reflections regarding women life liberty movement. As some of my colleagues may already know, my academic interest lies in the necropolitics of martyrdom, suicide, and pollution. During my last presentation at this Iranian Student Forum, I suggested that one may understand the commemoration of the deaths of people that have been killed during the current movement within the cultural tradition of martyrdom in Iran. It highlights the voluntary nature of the death, but the masculine nature of the culture of martyrdom has been changing in a way that includes women as agents that can decide their own death. Like you have just seen in Sara's presentation, dealing with Kurdish women's suicide. In today's presentation, I'd like to build on my previous presentation by sharing some other aspects of death commemoration I found noticeable during the women life liberty movement in Iran. First, popular circulation of portrait photos, and second, celebrating the birthday of the deceased. They might be the things that you might have already noticed, but I'd like to take a historical and comparative approach to share my idea on its implication and significance. I mostly relied on Instagram posts to gain relevant information, and my presentation is not as concrete as Sara's presentation that you have just seen, but some of my disorganized reflections. As a non-Iranian researcher, I deeply appreciate your feedback on my presentation. So the first thing I found notable was the prevalent circulation and utilization of portrait photos of the deceased. For example, the portrait of Mahsa Amini has been circulated worldwide in protest against the violence of Islamic Republic. People hold pictures of victims to show their solidarity, and in the tomb, portraits are printed in very large size, and photos are also printed on the cake. In this picture, the woman holds the picture of Abul Fath Adionzadeh, who was a 17-year-old student shot and killed in the protest at Mashhad. But the woman is not his mother, but the mother of Muhammad Reza Eskandari, who was also killed during the protest. She says, "We are not your mother, but happy birthday to the son of Iran." Family members so do not exclusively possess the photos of the deceased, but photos are circulated publicly and utilized repeatedly for commemoration and protest. One thing that should be noted about the photos is that they are not pictures of deathbed or the corpse that highlight the cruelty or misery of their death, but mostly the photos of the people when they were in an ideal condition. Based on her study of funeral culture in Sweden, Professor Eva Ahren notes that the photos of deathbeds were common in the Western context during the early 20th century, but later became outmoded. We have noticed that explicit photos of dead people were commonly circulated in the newspapers several decades ago, but now explicit pictures of dead bodies are avoided. But are the photos of Iranians that has been killed during the protests only for remembrance and commemoration like other memorial photos for funerals? No, they have political meanings embedded into the photos. And therefore, people in the photo come to personify the political values in themselves. The commemoration of the deaths of political martyrs is by no means a singular phenomenon in Iran, but there are some distinct aspects of it that we can consider. So, for example, take a look at Korean cemeteries and memorial parks. While there are some small photos inside the ossuary, mostly names and words are inscribed rather than big photos. It is similar in American, British, Canadian, or Chinese cemeteries, while I have to do further research on other regions. So related to the existence of visual profile is related to political commemoration of martyrs. The way American people protested against the death of George Floyd during the Black Lives Matter movement did not accompany his portrait photos, while there were some murals. The death portrait of the political martyr in Korea was only used during his politicized funeral, but his portrait was not commonly utilized during the protests. Even if we see the case of 2011 Arab uprisings, portraits of Mohammad Bouazizi were not a major tool for political protests, while his picture did appear in protests occasionally. On the other hand, in Iranian history, there were several occasions where the portraits were largely utilized, either in protests or commemoration. One occasion is the 1979 revolution, during which the portrait of Khomeini was widely distributed and painted, as well as that of Ali Shariati. This ideologues of revolution personifies certain political values in themselves. After the revolution, when the Iran-Iraq War happened, the image of Khomeini came to be closely linked to the Iranian individuals. Anthropologist Roxane Barzi, in her book Warring Souls, argues that the image of Khomeini was crucial to each individual in pursuing martyrdom, so that in the graveyard, their photos were displayed together with photos of Ruhollah Khomeini at the other side of photos of martyrs. So you can see this highlight of actual face of martyr soldiers. This is distinctive to what Benedict Anderson has noted, that the graveyard of nameless soldiers is the hallmark of nationalism. In Iran, their names and faces are recorded and displayed. Then how about civil movements in Iran? Amir Mousavi's face was popular during the 2009 Green Movement, but it had a specific background of presidential election. And the green's color and the slogan, "Where is my vote?" was more popular. I didn't see something similar to the deaths of Neda Agha Sultan, who was killed during the 2009 Green Movement. But the protest against PS 752 crash has engaged with the profiles and pictures of victims. These victims came to represent certain political values in themselves, while this tradition may have its roots in Islamism. The difference is that they are not uniform as the image of Khomeini, and they're not controlled by the state. These big photos are not for personal commemoration, but for display and thus protest. In the end, these photos are widely circulated for protest and commemoration and collaged together with each other to form the aggregate political message, like during the Nuruz, when the photos of victims were collected together for commemoration. The second element I found unique from the death commemoration of the Women Life Liberty movement was the celebration of the birthday of the dead people. Together, their photos and often their pictures printed on the cake itself, family members or any people who have emotional connection to these people celebrate their birthday. I have seen several occasions where the family members of certain victims celebrate other victims' birthday. This paradoxical celebration of birthday adds a tragic atmosphere as people are celebrating birth and mourning death at the same time. But it's not only about sorrow. In this celebration, there is a mixture of ideas that people are resisting the death inflicted on the victims by the Islamic Republic, a grievance that the young disease would have turned certain age without the Islamic Republic's violence, and that the spirit of the dead people is still alive. The birthday of Neda Agha Sultan, who was killed during the 2009 Green Movement, has been commemorated since. On a side note, the tenacity of death commemoration in Iran is what has drawn me to the topic of necropolitics in Iran. When I visited Iran, and particularly the city of Kashan in 2019, and visited the graveyard for war martyrs, I was struck by how people were still mourning their death like they have died just yesterday. So celebration of Neda Agha Sultan's birthday has also been combined with some elements of protest against the Islamic Republic. Birthday celebration provides occasion for gathering as well as political protest. It reminds me of the 1979 revolution when the 40-day cycles of the commemoration of death of the martyrs decided the rhythm and post-revolutionary writing of revolution. Following the death of a seminary student that was killed during the protest against the sensational article on July 9th, 40th day memorial services took place where more protesters were killed, after which protest memorial service continued in the cycles of 40 days. Until protests were routinized and radicalized, this ritualistic spectacle of death dominated the image of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, influencing the post-revolutionary writing of a revolution as Islamic. In my other project, I'm exploring the non-religious root of this political commemoration of death. Now people are increasingly focusing on birthday as a new site of death commemoration. So in conclusion, I'd like to express my sincerest solidarity with people in Iran who are fighting for their life for what they believe. Thinking of these people, I was indecisive about whether it is appropriate to make these people as my research object according to my academic interest and what meaning my observation has for Iranian people, tired of symbols and experience of death and trying to search for life, not death. I hope my presentation will recognize how Iranian people are utilizing the necropolitical capital that the Islamic Republic has accumulated for years in a new way. The language of martyrdom, or shahadat, has partly changed to highlight martyrs for free Iran, or in the vocabularies of heroes or pahlavans that resonate with Shahnameh, which is another trend of Iranian nationalism distinct from Shiism. I don't think the kind of visualization that highlights photos is solely due to popularization of social media, but engages with domestic necropolitical culture. The unilateral image of Khomeini or the image of soldiers that are given values through their link to Khomeini has gradually been democratized to the autonomous bottom-up martyrs. The death prescribed and necropolitics characterized by state are being resisted and reinterpreted. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gunha. Okay, Leila Moslemi Mehni my apologies, is a PhD candidate at the Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilization at the University of Toronto under Professor Talakoli Taghi's supervision. She received her BA in Museum Studies from Cultural Heritage Education Center in Tehran, Iran in 2005. She has received her first MA in Art History from York University in 2005, and then received her second MA in Middle Eastern Studies from University of Toronto in 2018. Her dissertation is on the Iranian visual public sphere from 1890 to 1953, which is the study of images from the periodicals through the emergence of print in Iran. Please join me in welcoming Leila. Leila John, you can take over.
Yes, thank you, Shabnam John. In this presentation, I will discuss the depiction of female figures in caricatures from different artists in diaspora. These images convey a certain meaning in which they reflected on the significant part of the Iranian history in regard to the role of women during the 2022 uprising. The girls and women of Iran poured into the street after the killing of Mahsa Amini by Islamic Republic. This became a reason for the artists, writers, and activists mobilizing and participating in the struggle for human rights and gender justice. This presentation aims to analyze the image of female figure in relation with the context of the caricatures. The first image is created by Nasrin Sheikhi, shows the confrontation between Ali Khamenei, Islamic Republic Supreme Leader, and Iranian woman. Ali Khamenei represents the theocratic establishment. The police guard is the state, and the women represent the Iranian women who are suffering at the hand of the state. Sheikhi is given the title of resistant to her artwork, and it has shown through the action in the image when Ali Khamenei is trying to bash down the female figure on the ground by the support of the police force. As the result, this action creates a deep crack by her resistance, which led to the destruction of the religious seminary on the background image. The body of woman is the symbol of the resistance here. The title of image on the right reads, quote, Constitution of the Islamic Regime Books, end quote. And if you look at the right side of the image, you would see the code that actually says Constitution of Islamic Regime Book. And Sheikhi states in her Instagram post, for these caricatures, quote, we will change the book of the crime, end quote. The folded book is holding the crushed and suffocated female bodies while they are soaked in the blood. The trace of blood is everywhere. Some of them are being crushed inside the book, and some are being sucked in. The women hold the feminine side in their hands. In this image, the killing and the suffering of the women is blamed squarely on the unjust constitution of Islamic Republic. The book is green, and along with the white and red is also the symbol of the Iranian flag, between which Iranian women are being crushed. In Article 20 from the Iranian Constitution of Law, it articulates that, quote, all Iranians, both men and women, equally enjoy the protection of the law and enjoy all human, political, economic, social, and cultural rights in conformity with Islamic criteria, end quote. In this article, when it is indicated that the equality is measured according to Islamic criteria dictated by Islamic Republic, the human right of the men and women is already being jeopardized. These laws are numerous, and it is not the scope of this presentation, but the main ones that I can remark here, especially for the women, are as below. The Islamic Republic adopted a civil code based on conservative Islamic law or Sharia, dropped the age of marriage to 13, and make it extremely difficult for women to initiate divorce. The Islamic Republic imposed new restrictions on women's dress, child custody, inheritance, and foreign travel. In this image from Reza Jozani that are created by digital illustration program, mythical scenes have been portrayed. Women in both images have supernatural powers to defeat the tyranny. The first woman in left penetrates her spear with the slogan of Women, Life, Freedom, which is attached to the head of the spear inside tarantula, which has the Islamic Republic emblem. The woman in the right also shattering the head of guard by shouting the slogan of Women, Life, Freedom. In this review, the women have simply turned into the mythical figures, trying to demolish the autocracy with their supernatural power. These images make the statement that everyday, ordinary actions and slogan can potentially have an extraordinary effect against the dictatorship. The title for this image is quote, "Your name became our symbol," end quote, which is the title that Reza Aqili, the artist, has given to the image. The name of Mahsa Amini has been seared into psyche of Iranian public in this image, Mahsa is capturing the two snakes which has shown out from Khamenei's shoulders by her two braided hair. The artists draw on the symbolism of Zahak, who was the mythical tyrant king of Shahnameh. But here, instead of a male protagonist like Kaveh, who defeated Zahak, the artist depicts a young woman without veil who is going to defeat the tyranny. The symbolic fight between these two figures, in fact, is the fight of the revealing women's hair, metaphor for liberty against the dogmatism of theocracy. For the next image, in the assessment of Tawakkoli Targhi, he indicated that, quote, an increasing number of the late 19th and early 20th century non-official newspapers and journals characterize the homeland as a dying 6,000 years old mother. The image of a dying mother nation or Madar Watan create an urgent situation obligating her children to rush to save her life, end quote. In one image produced during First Pahlavi era, Madar Watan is personified by the Iranian map, holding the crown and being supported by the king father figure. The image of Madar Watan have been circulated in many forms, and it has found its way into 2022 Uprising. In comparison to the Mother Nation, an image from Qajar period, who is under the red blanket at her dying bed with the children around her, the image at the left side shows Mahsa, who symbolizes the Mother Nation with no children. She is dying at her bed, which is represented as the map of Iran. The artist has incorporated her last picture while she was in the hospital with the map of Iran to convey the meaning of Madar Watan for Mahsa, who is losing her life as a result of injustice. In this image, the mother is shown as the map of Iran, and she is an inseparable part of the map, grooming her hair with tranquility and serenity. The artist's statement about this image is that this lady doesn't need the black chador. The female body is also represented the flag of Iran in the three colors of green, white, and red. In Tukan Neyestani artworks, the depiction of female figure is taken into another level, which is more bold. The figures are being depicted as courageous and athletic in the first two images. They are in a struggle with Khamenei and trying to bring him down. In the image on the left, there is an athletic female who is trying to suffocate the supreme leader, and she's showing her muscular body off for the spectator while she is proud of herself. The figure on the left is not as athletic as the right one, but her agile figure is about to cut his head or beard off. The two figures have somewhat dim color red lipstick. In the other depictions of female battling Khamenei, the red colored become more pronounced by depicting the red high heel shoes, red nails, and women lingerie, Neyestani is trying to play with the feminine accessories and overemphasizes the fact that this masculine strength has a pronounced feminine side beside it. By showing these feminine symbols, the artist is trying to depict an erotic image, but rather depiction of feminine bravery. In the image from Mona Neyestani, I'm not too sure that Mona and Tuka are related, but they are different artists. And so this is like Mona's Neyestani's caricature. In the image from Mona's Neyestani, in the right side, schoolgirls are gathering behind Khamenei. Mona has explained, quote, last week, state media announced the meeting of female students with Ali Khamenei with many advertisements. The girls who, according to the regime-affiliated media, participated in the coming of age or Jashn Taklif celebration. These students prayed behind the leader of the Islamic Republic in this show, end quote. According to human rights organizations, dozens of children and teenagers have been killed by police officers in the nationwide uprising in 2022. In the weeks and months following Mahsa's murder, many primary schools chanted slogans against Khamenei. In compared to the right side of the image, in the left side, there is the awakening of the schoolgirls while they are becoming detached from the monotone image which of the Islamic Republic is representing, by refusing to blindly following of the Islamic leader as they become independent and the autonomous member of the 2022 uprising. At the end, they become the victim of the same system which wanted to suffocate their liberty by indoctrinating them at the young age. The image is the depiction of the failed indoctrination of the Islamic Republic. In relation to this image, in his speech addressing the young girls, Khamenei stated, the celebration of duty means that you are no longer a child, but a teenager and take responsibility. And you can be effective in the family, school, and the play environment with your friend and guide others to the right path, which is the responsibility of all of us. He comments on how students guide their friends into the right path, which is enjoying the good and the forbidding the wrong, or amr be ma'ruf wa nahy az munkar. Enjoying good and forbidding wrong, or Amr be Ma'ruf wa Nahy az Munkar, which has been promoted by the Islamic State since its inception, was the main factor which caused of Mahsa Amini's death in the first place. According to the image, whoever disobeyed from the command would be killed. In this image, the schoolgirls of decisive and strong member of the Iranian people who knows the outcome of the going against the monotone hegemonic oppression of the state, but they still try to rebel nonetheless. The last image from Maya Neyestani shows a woman whose eyes is shut, and her eye is growing numerous protesting mouths that they shout for the women, life and freedom. Shooting the protester in the eyes with shotgun is not only to demolish the eyes and the beauty of the features, but also is the warning for the protesters not to come into the streets anymore. However, in this image, the growth of the protesting mouth is a message to the spectator for the future magnified power by the Iranian youth. In conclusion, Mahsa Amini murder in the detention center of the security police was the beginning of the manifestation for important changes in Iranian society, which, although it was recognizable before, has now been clearly revealed to everyone. Today's protesting women are no longer the domain of professional women's rights activists. but all women whose protest activism is based on their lived experience of gender discrimination. These images shows the process in which the women become the self-directed, independent, and alert member of the society, whose disobedience is a great danger to the state because they are not only the citizen, but also the mother, daughter, and sister of all other men. The personification of these women in image are the indication of the fact that Iranian women are major forces of changes in Iran. These images portray the resistance fighting for women's rights, a dignified life, all-encompassing liberty, and therefore it is a reflection of the slogan, Women, Life, Freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila John. On to our next presenter. Negar Banisafar is a starting first year PhD student in the Near Middle Eastern Civilizations at the University of Toronto under the supervision of Professor Tawakkoli Taghi. Currently, she works as a research assistant for the Iranian cinema, the Cinema Iranica project, and the phenomenal Tawakkoli archive. I can care with the phenomenal. Both at the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies. She studied English language and literature at the Allame Tabatabai University for her BA, and she also has an MA in dramatic literature from Sura Art University in Iran. Please join me in welcoming Negar. Negar Jan, you can take over.
Thank you, Shabnam. Just a minute so I can share my screen. Thank you, everyone, for attending this session, and thank you, Shabnam Jan, for moderating the session, and to Leila Jan. Thank you. To Leila Jan for organizing this fabulous symposium. Before starting my presentation, I would like to offer my condolences to all the families who lost their loved ones during the past month. So my presentation mostly deals with the historiography of the recent past, in this case, women like liberty movement, and more specifically, Negar Shah Karami's case. So to begin with, I'll give you a brief account of what happened to Negar. So today I'll be talking about the discussions gone public about the gender identity and sexual orientation of Negar Shah Karami, a 16-year-old girl who went missing after 20th of September 2022 while in the streets of Tehran for the murdering of Mahsa Amini by Iran's morality police. 10 days later, Negar's lifeless body was found with numerous signs of torture on. Iranian officials claimed that Negar had committed suicide and refused holding themselves responsible for her death. After her brutal murder, Negar's figure with her short hair and bold look started circulating on different social media platforms, among which was a video of her singing a famous Iranian song. On 17th of November 2022, an article was published in the magazine of Germany that included an interview with a girl named Neil, who claimed to be Negar's girlfriend, which meant that Negar has had homosexual inclinations. And you can see here in this slide Neil's picture and how she has gathered Negar's images in her house. Right after this piece was published, Shadi Amin, a prominent Iranian LGBTQ activist, researcher, and the founder and director of the Iranian Lesbian and Transgender Network, won the International Lesbian Visibility Awards on November 18th. When thanking the jury, she dedicated the award to Negar and addressed her as a lesbian and therefore a member of the LGBTQ community by repeatedly referring to the article published in the German magazine. However, on the 20th of November, Negar's aunt, Eszter Karami, a brilliantly talented painter, who used to be Nikah's painting instructor, who she would live with, published a post on her public Instagram account addressing Shadi Amin and criticizing her for not fact-checking the credibility of Site's article with Nikah's family. Atash asserted that Nikah was only a teenager in the process of forming her identity, and that Shadi Amin had no right to publicize and label her as among any certain community, especially having in mind that she is not alive without having a chance to defend herself or talk for herself. She also added that although she respects the LGBTQ community, Nikah had been heterosexual. First of all, I should say that it is enormously difficult for me to talk about this, and it was a deeply saddening and painful experience for me to see that the discussion of fighting for freedom was intertwined with sexual orientations of a 16-year-old child. But I decided and sort of allowed myself to work on this topic because Nikah's aunt, as you can see, has repeatedly talked about this and declared that she will be standing for the truth and won't let the truth of Nikah's life be distorted. So the fact that she's going to write about this case makes me think that I won't be placing, to use quotes, this phrase, the burden of remembering on Nikah's family, which is a huge burden. But why it mattered to me, why this topic mattered. As the happenings were unfolding, we were all witnessing history taking place right in front of our eyes, say from the music Shervin Hajipur wrote that involved trips Iranians all over the world and in the diaspora wrote. We were all involved in it and were part of it. Also, Nikah's case mattered to me as a student of history who always has to think and deal with the question of how we write history and how we look and narrate the past. Especially this case was a complex one, as Nikah was underage, had been recently murdered, meaning that this is recent history we're talking about, and her family and friends are as close as witnesses to her life are still alive. So the back and forth of arguments between the two sides of the story made me concerned who was right. I tried to prognosticate in solitude on how her history will be written and how we will be remembering her in the future and what will be written about her identity in history books when the revolution successfully comes to fruition in later years. And meanwhile, this famous quotation that we've all heard, that history is written by victors, and Walter Benjamin's quote that he says, there's a document of civilization. There's no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism. So these quotations and these thoughts, let's say, kept whirling in my head. After all, what we know for sure is that what we have at hand in the archives and historical material have once been recent history at the time they were written, and they were all filled with silences, eliminations, and distortion of facts. So it is important to view this topic that happened in the recent past from different angles and put it up for discussion. So we create a situation in which we bring forth a polyphony of voices. So in a nutshell, the resurfacing of these questions of how we write history of the deceased and how and who gets to write about them, combined with the persistence of Nikah's aunt to narrate a true version of her identity, impelled me to read articles and books that might have dealt with similar questions or situations. And this led to the conclusion, which I will be talking about after viewing this matter from different angles. Paul Ricoeur says, as soon as the idea of a debt to the dead, to people of flesh and blood to whom something really happened in the past, stops giving documentary research its highest end, history loses its meaning. So the need for documented research is also what Nikah's aunt asked for in this situation, and it is one of the areas which seems to make Shadi Amin's narration flawed. And Atash Karami, Nikah's aunt, truly points out to this, addressing herself as someone who has constantly fought against taboos. And while she sympathizes with the queer community and realizes their feeling of being left out in Iran society, Tasha Karami asked the researcher who claimed that Nikah was a lesbian, meaning Shadi Amin, that she should have had reached out to Nikah's family for a true account of her life. Tasha also further explains that Nikah's sexual life is no one's business, even her family's. She also says that she realizes that teenagers, due to their vulnerability and feeling unsafe and not trusting their families, might hide their true sexual inclinations from their immediate family, and that she knows how cruel the world has been to the queer people. She says she realizes when queers would say, why should a teenager open up about the most intimate part of their life with their family? And she says she recognizes this, but also she insists that her relations with Nikah was of friends with one another, and they were familiar with each other's thoughts and feelings. And she asserts that she had no bias or judgment towards nothing that is part of nature of human life. She further adds that they had vividly talked about sexual orientations, and that Nikah did ask for her consultation in almost everything. So she knew about her feelings, and in summary, she said she was sure that her inclination was not homosexual up until she was alive, and that whatever she says about Nikah is the result of her lived experience with Nikah, and not due to the prejudice, fears of remaining chaste in the eyes of biased people. Atay says Nikah was a teenager and 16-year-old and in search of finding her sexual identity and experiencing life. And then she addresses Shadi Amin by asking, how come when someone under 18 is murdered, they are regarded as a kid and registered as a child who was murdered, but when it comes to their sexual life, they would be treated as such. They wouldn't be treated as such. So she asks, can one express firm opinions about the friendship of two teenagers who live in two different countries, a relationship which is devoid of corporeality? With all that being said, considering Amin's stance toward Nikah's identity, who claims that the majority of the LGBTQ adolescents in Iran resist talking about their inclinations as they are scared of losing their families if their differences become apparent, it seems that Shadi Amin, just like Saidiya Hartman, who is a great American historian, might be sort of using consciously or unconsciously creative fabulation to recreate a life she thinks Nikah might have been deprived of. And therefore, by doing so, she wants to give voice to the queer community who have been silenced and eliminated truly so for a long time in Iran. But the question is, can we, in this case, use Saidiya Hartman's method? Let's see in what circumstances and under what conditions and how Saidiya Hartman does that. Hartman, in her works such as Wayward Lives and Venus in Two Acts, I'm quoting, recreates the experience of young urban Black women who desired an existence qualitatively different than the one that had been scripted for them, through a melding of history and literary imagination, end quote. So through using a method that she innovated herself, which is called critical fabulation, Hartman takes a tiny bit of archival material and recreates a story on that topic based on available facts. For example, in Venus in Two Acts, she brings to life Venus, quote, the Black girl of her story who remains only a passing fragment in the archives of slavery, and tries to imagine how her life might have been like based on other data available of those days. So can we say Amin has done something like that, like creative fabulation? What are the differences here? First difference to note is that unlike Venus in Two Acts, Nikah has not been pushed to the background and her family is alive. And numerous data on her life is accessible and her family is available for having dialogues with, as her aunt also has repeatedly emphasized that. Also, Atash and also Nikah's sister have not remained silent on this. And if any research has to be written about nikah, probably it has to be written in a collaborative dialogue with the family of the deceased. Another aspect that differs with Saidiya Hartman's methods and should work as a deterrent for researchers and historians to fabulate on is gender identity of the underage and respecting the limits of the unknown in historiography. Nikah was 16 and still a child and probably still trying to figure out her identity. So labeling her as either this or that wouldn't do justice to the real her and her desires. Just like her aunt expresses that, truly so expresses that she was in search of finding her identity. So as Saidiya Hartman also states in her article, Witnessing to Act, sometimes and in some cases we shall, quote, respect the limits of what cannot be known, end quote. And therefore we should, quote, amplify the impossibility of its telling, which is of course among the limitations of the archive. And in the base case, a researcher or historian of such cases has to deal with speculations and not express undeniable facts. And in a sense, to use Saidiya Hartman's idea, such histories should be written with and against the archive. However, having all these limitations in mind, creative fabulation and in this case, Shadi Amin's assertion does signify the huge suppression and elimination of the LGBTQ plus community in Iran, which opens up an alternative way for looking at this topic. Michel Rodolphe Trio, a widely respected scholar of Haitian history, rejects the facile proposition that history is no more than justifying propaganda written by the winners of conflict. Rather, he suggests that we can gain a broader and more accurate view of past events by striving to listen to broader spectrum of voices. And so although Shadi Amin's assertions lack factual credibility in the case of nikah, if we just, as Trio says, strive to listen to a broader array of voices, we can acknowledge that her claims speak of the bigger historical phenomenon, which is the elimination of those who do not comply with gender norms in Iran. Oh, sorry. In other words, what Shadi Amin has said is a reminder of a larger historical context, which lies in the long history of eliminating same-sex love in Iran and suppressing homosexuality and homoeroticism. But in this case, however catchy this narrative must be, we have Nikah's family who feel they hold the truth about Nikah's life to defend her. And also, we shouldn't forget that Nikah was underage and in search of her inclination. So although there has been lots of suppressions regarding those who do not comply with gender norms in Iran, it shouldn't be the case that historians or researchers quote, invent and impose to achieve a concrete determination. All in all, my purpose has been to offer a pondering over this case and the two narratives so we can find an alternative lens to look at it and review why, setting aside the power relations at play, at times the urge to construct a history for absent subjects might take place on the side of researchers and historians. Let's say in cases where we have no witness or family of the person and not enough data like Saidiya Hartman, we might be in those cases able to do that. But in the case of nikah, it differs. However, one cannot ignore that this construction of identity or the attempt to do creative fabulation by this researcher speaks of a lack and a silence in our history, which lies at the heart of woman life liberty slogan. Nikah has left an unerasable trace so vivid that we need not to create a fabula out of her life. The images and videos speak for themselves. Nothing better than these represent Nikah for us. A girl with her feet up in the sky, a girl daring to act. Nikah narrates her own story. Whatever we need to see is there. Nikah is showing her will for freedom by the act of singing, burning her headscarf. She is a change maker who publicly manifested her discontent with the laws in Iran. and attempted to change what had been scripted for them. So these are all facts about Nikah we can be sure of. Anything other than that belongs to the realm of the unknown, toward which we got to play the role of modest observers who shall participate, as Saidi Hartman puts it, in the as yet incomplete project of freedom. And that was all. Thank you.
Many thanks, Negar. And then now to our last but not least, to Eszter, who ran to catch a spot where she can have a stable system to present. Thank you, Eszter. Sorry, my system is slow. Eszter Melita Szabo is a master's student in the Near Middle Eastern Civilizations at the University of Toronto, under the supervision of Professor Mohammad Tawakkoli Targhi. Presently, she dedicates her efforts as a research assistant for the Women Poets Iranica project at the Elahé Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies. With extensive training in philology, she holds a BA in Indian Studies with a minor in Iranian Studies, specializing in exploration of classical and modern languages and literature from both regions. Please join me in welcoming Eszter. Thank you, Eszter, for running to the archive to be able to present with us.
Thank you.
Please take over.
All for organizing this event, Leila Zhen and Shabnam Zhen for moderating. And first of all, I would like to express my condolences and sympathy to all the Iranians during this, who just lost their lives during this movement. And I'm just sharing my screen now. So my presentation's title is Borders and Beyond, the Loud Voices of the Iranian Diaspora. And just a moment. Okay. So in my paper, I took a look at the profound poetic production within the Iranian diaspora, specifically focusing on the literary poetic works of diasporic Iranian women, poets who have been actively engaging with the Zhen, Zhian, Azadi or Zhen Zendegi Azadi movement. The literature, art, and generally the cultural production of the diaspora have been the subject of scholarly investigation for some time now. And we can be proud of sitting in Toronto or presenting in Toronto because many of the most important works have been conducted by scholars working in Canada or in Toronto, like Nima Naqibi's work, or the other one, Women, Art and Literature in the Iranian Diaspora. And each of them are these are 4 monographs on women writings in the diaspora, investigating the literary works from different angles and perspectives. For example, Women Rights Iran is Nima Naqibi focuses on the personal memoirs of diasporic Iranian writers. And there is another one, Women, Art and Literature in the Iranian Diaspora, which is a more general work on the literary and artistic production. And they have been a lot of different other practices in the Iranian diaspora, which are related to literary production and cultural production. These were distributed mainly through literary journals or many other platforms, including these literary or traditional kind of medias. And you can see here 4 literary journals: Avay Zan, Sang, Avay Tabid,
and the German one called Dort. This issue of Avaye Tabit and Avaye Zhen, these are recent issues of these literary journals, while Sang, this is the first volume, the first issue was published in 1996, and Dort, which is a German language journal being published in Germany now, but related to Iran. So basically, Dort is a literary journal in which Iranian diasporic writers and poets publish their works. Besides the traditional platforms, there is a really huge online literary scene with online journals, with separately published poems and other literary magazines. And of course, we can find numerous poems and social media accounts publishing poetry on social media, which, for example, there is one recent channel, Share Charsadayek, which is run by the renowned poet Sapide Jodairi, which is a Telegram account and channel, in which they have been the Iranian diasporic poets have been publishing poetry from the very beginning of this movement. And of course, on other platforms like YouTube and other video sharing platforms, they have been the poets have been publishing poetry recitations and other mixed media artworks. In my paper, I have read and analyzed around 50 poems written by 35 poets, and I will present some of these works now. I chose to study 5 literary magazines, online literary magazines and websites, and one special issue, which was also published online, which is an issue of the literary journal Shahragan, which features 40 poets, the works of 40 poets, around 60 poems, if I remember well. And yeah, you can see here the Shahragan and the Shahr Omer. This was one of the websites I have used for this paper, and the other one was Bang. I attempted to characterize the mainstreams of the protest poetry of this Zan Zendegi movement, and I have found symbolic poetry, feminist poetry, and political poetry as different poetic streams, which can be identified in the general Shere Enqelabi or Shere Eterazi, the revolutionary or protest poetry of this movement. And I would like to briefly discuss the literary antecedents of these poetic streams. As you all probably know, the history of women's poetry it's really long, so it can be traced back to the very beginning of the classical Persian poetry to the 10th, 11th century, and the current poetry of this movement shares many similarities with the 20th century poetry of the committed literature or the revolutionary poetry of the 20th century. And of course, there have been some prominent figures of feminist poetry as well during the last decade. And also there was another stream of poetic stream during the 20th and the 21st century of Persian poetry, which can be characterized as a more classical type of poetry because due to its adherence to the classical Persian traditions. And here, of course, for Farrokhzad, it is not needed to introduce her, but there is another picture of Jaleh, it can be said that she was the very first feminist women poet of Iran. Jaleh Qa'im Maqam. And I would like to discuss revolutionary poetry a bit more. We can see that revolution, freedom, and all these slogans of the Zhen Zindagi Azadi movement have been in use for a decade now, a century now, sorry, not decade. It has these notions appear in the intellectual literatures of the constitutional revolution, all the literary and any other cultural journals and writings. And of course, the Iranian Revolution of 1979 also features these notions, which we can find during in these Zhen Zindagi Azadi poetic works as well. Two pioneering women, Shams Kasmai and Zandokh Shirazi, took serious steps towards women's rights, and they have been actively engaging with these notions as well, including the freedom of women, and they were actively writing about women's rights during the last century. And our first category is the symbolic or revolutionary protest poetry, which share many similarities with the poetry of the last century. It is rooted in the committed literature, and one of its main features is that it addresses social issues in a highly symbolic manner. It uses this revolutionary protest poetry uses old metaphors with new meanings and new references. Here you can see an illustration of Nowruz, which was produced during this movement as well. And I have brought here one example of this highly poetic and symbolic poetry of Parvin Salajagh, who is a professor at Tehran Azad University, professor of Persian literature. And you can read the Persian original as well here, and my translations. Here you can see that she plays with the notions of Nowruz, and she uses the notions of Nowruz to refer to or to express her hope that better days would come. آیا دوباره عدس‌ها در شیشه‌های نوروز سبز خواهد شد؟ ای همه دانه‌های جهان، اردیبهشت ما کجاست؟ The notion of Nowruz and the hope for a better future expressed through these notions and figures of the spring and trees turning green, blossoming, and all these imaginary language has been in use again from the very beginning of the 20th century, as well as during the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So this tradition is continued as well, and we can see very recent poems which reflects this kind of tradition. Or another one, I try to bring less known poets as well, not just the big known names. So this is a poet of Bahar Khodabande, who is in Tehran as well. She is very young, and you can see a quote from her, one of her poems. من دیگر گورستان نیستم، با کشته های امسال کوهستانی شدم که ایستاده مرده است. And again, my translation. And yeah, she's playing with the pun and the expression of ایستاده مرده است, which can be translated as I have, like literally, that I have died standing, but it has another more idiomatic meaning as well, to die really because of your courageous act. And she refers to the brave woman, Iranian woman during this movement as well, with this کوهستانی شدم که ایستاده مرده است. And the second category is the personal poetry or feminist poetry, which is, in my opinion, quite a new thing in Persian poetry, because except from Jale Qaem Maqan, whose photo we have seen before, and the poetry of Forough Farrokhzad, there haven't been so many poets who wrote really personal or feminist poetry. But nowadays it has been more common to express the female experiences in a very direct manner. Here as well, we can see a short quote from a poem which was written by a very young poet. We will see the whole poem on the next slide, and I highlighted here one specific part of it. As you can see, I really like the first sentence, the first line of this part, like Zan budan be tan koni, putting on being a woman on the street. And as you can see here, the emphasis is placed on female experiences, the poet's personal experiences as being a woman, Zan budan. The metaphors and the imaginary usually includes body, hair, cage, like flying and escaping, being released from this cage of the body, of this experience of being a female, being a woman in Iran. And of course, it is difficult, as the poet is saying. I know it is difficult, it is difficult. The poems belongs to Sana's Davodzadeh Far, and it was published in this literary journal of Sharkan, which was a special issue dedicated to the Zan Zendagi Azadi movement. And lastly, the third category of poems, which includes mainly really political poetry, which is also, I think, quite unique to the recent political movements and revolutionary movements of Iran, because they usually contain direct reflections on the political events, and more specifically, they include specific names, mainly the names of the victims. I have brought a poem by Shaida Mohammadi, which was written on the 18th of January, right after the execution of Mohammad Hosseini, which took place on the 7th of January this year. And this is my translation of the poem. And as you can see here, this is just a part of it because it's a longer poem. But as you can see, Mohammad Hosseini, the victim of the execution, who was allegedly murdered or killed Basij member in Karaj, and therefore he was executed on the 7th of January this year. And Shaida Mohammadi names Mohammad Hosseini and writes her poem to him, to remember him. Sometimes I always think of you. And you can see my translation here as well. And at the end of the poem, so this is the end of the poem, you can see other names as well, like Optin, who was a really renowned literary figure and a really close friend of Shaida Mohammadi, the poet herself. And you can see Nika Khodanur. So many of the victims of the Zan Zendegi Azadi movement. And finally, I would like to point out that many famous poets joined the movement, this literary movement. One of those was Sepide Jodairi, who is running this Telegram channel, Sher Char Sadayek, or Fatima Shams and Parto Nuriala. And lastly, I would like to propose some new questions, and maybe it can be a subject of further research, how these poetry recitations can be analyzed through the lens of media studies, which I'm not an expert of. So it is really interesting to see that now the poets again have faces. So it's not just like divans, but because of the online media and the online platforms, they tend to become, they are more visible than they were before. And it could be really good to see how it relates to the style and manner in which they write poetry nowadays. And we can listen to them together, I guess.
سلام. بهاریه 1402 رو تقدیم می‌کنم به تمام سوگواران پاره‌های تن ایران، به خصوص بازماندگان. یک هفت سین یخزده بر سنگ سرد گور، یک جفت چشم خیس تو را می‌کند مرور. از موج گیسوان رها در مسیر باد تا چشمهای بسته خوابیده زیر گور. اینجا کنار خاطره هایت نشسته‌ام با هفت سین ناقص بی سور و بی سرور. تقویم پا به پای زمستان زمهریر از خنده های روشن تو می کند عبور. ای کاش این زمان ستمگر بایستد، این روزهای شب زده مانده از تو دور. تحویل سال لحظه بغض مکرر است، یا شور زندگی وسط چشمهای کور. سرو روان خم شده بر سفره بهار، ای کوه سربلند سرافراز پرغرور. نامت بلند باد که این خاک سوگوار، خون می‌دهد هر آینه در انتظار نور. سال نو مبارک.
And this is another poem by Parto Nuriala, which is dedicated to Mahsa. And as I have mentioned, this is quite a new feature to involve and include names, specific names in poems. the dedication of poetry to certain friends or people have been quite common, but I think it is quite a new feature. And you can see here as well that the usage of Giswan and the emphasis on the hair in relation to the events of the movement, the murder of Mahsa Amini. It was published on Avaya Tabid as well. And thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you, Eszter. Thank you all. Thank you, Leila, John, for organizing the panel. Thank you, Negar and Leila and Sara and Eszter and Gunha for presenting and for taking us through this fascinating overview. I have a couple of questions posed already that I'm going to ask, and both of these questions are posed to all of you. So feel free to jump in. Dr. Pourzand is asking, she's interested to know how the recent movement has impacted you guys as an academic interest. How do you think Iranian or Persian studies was proactive or reactive in analyzing and or supporting the movement, and how it has or should change Iranian or Persian studies going forward?
So maybe I will start. Personally, I feel really connected to the movement, as my own research relates to and investigates the poetry of the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So I feel like the work we are doing here, all with the Women Poets Iranica project, is really important to conduct. And about how they think Iranian Persian studies was proactive or reactive, as I have my interests include anthropology as well. And I feel like Iranian studies and Persian studies still has to be more proactive, I guess, just like anthropology is. So the activism part is really important as well, to relate to the current movements and any kind of events happening in Iran. That's from my side.
Thank you, Dr. Pourzand, for asking the questions. Well, actually, for my research interest was the other way around, because I'm currently working on a Iranian visual public sphere, so mainly working on the caricatures of the late Qajar and early Pahlavi. But as soon as we wanted to put this together, you know, for the presentation, I decided to kind of like connect my own knowledge into, like, you know, finding the caricatures from diaspora. In terms of like how Persian studies was activated in this regard, I think we were kind of proactive since the beginning, but because, you know, we are student and we have to work other courses and we have a course load, you know, this presentation kind of like, you know, allowed us to have it like in the summertime after, like, you know, we finished the course load. But in terms of the Iranian studies part, I would say that the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies had an immense, like, you know, impact on creating, like, you know, lectures and also seminars in regard to the movement of the Zan Zendegi Azadi. And if you go to the website and in the events, you can find out those, you know, informations.
Thank you, Leila. Gunha, you're next. I don't see your hand up again, but now, yeah.
So, I mean, for researchers, I think it is always kind of, it makes us hesitant to make some definite remarks about ongoing social movement, because we don't know what will really happen. And as a kind of like academic integrity, it is kind of dangerous to make too early conclusion And I'm personally kind of always scared of making those comments because I'm afraid whether it will influence negatively to my future visit to Iran. But if I think of the real life threats that protesters are ongoing now in Iran, I think we should and we can make those scholarly research, and we should. And I personally heard like something from Korean academia about like Iranian studies there, and Iranian studies in Korea has been deeply attached to Islamic Republic's government. So for them, it is kind of really dangerous to make those comments because they think it might influence negatively their whole academic career. But I've heard like there are some scholars even in those environments making comments, scholarly comments based on what they believe and what they observe. So I'm not really sure what to say about the whole academia, Iranian studies academia, but to the extent of myself, I think these are the comments that I can make. Thank you for the great question.
Thank you, Gunha. And next, Negar was having a hand up, please.
Thank you, Dr. Puzan, for asking these questions. Right now, even now, it made me reflect on this topic and, let's say, assess my own understanding and proactivity on this matter. But as Gunha said, I agree with that. It's a little bit critical for us as like beginners, and I mean, I can consider myself as a beginner in as a student of history, as a scholar. So we're a bit wary of what we're talking about and what we say, because maybe later on in the future, we may have different opinions, and it would put our future scholarly career in jeopardy. But having said that, for your first question, it made me think that what we do theoretically here in academia does practically matter in raising awareness and sort of maybe changing the unfolding of events, and not changing, let's say, but sort of giving the people in Iran the feeling that we here in diaspora care about what's going on in Iran. And for the second question, I believe we were mostly proactive here, considering the speed to which the events unfolded. It is normal not to be able to keep up with the pace of what's going on in Iran. But from a certain point on, I believe the academia in the academic diaspora started keeping up with the speed of whatever was happening in Iran. And I myself, thanks to Leila for organizing this, I felt that I've been awakened from a winter sleep. So thank you for that.
I have a couple of more questions. One of them is, again, directed to all of you from Dr. Amin. And I'm quoting here: insightful and fascinating presentations. My question for all the panelists is how they assess level of circulation and interaction among communities and constituencies within Iran and those in the diaspora when individuals create or circulate content related to women, life, liberty. Who do they imagine is paying attention? Does the feedback and or engagement they receive reflect those expectations?
In terms of my own, own experience that I have, because I had a faster access to the diaspora caricatures, so I decided to work on these caricatures and I didn't even I didn't even go beyond searching the caricatures within Iran, but which I'm not too sure that, you know, there are caricatures that are circulated at that moment or at this moment. But and it's very true that, like, you know, the lens that I found in my own caricatures are more like looking at the women in the caricatures, and then, you know, how they actually they can be expressed, and, like, you know, and how they are focused, like, you know, in the pictures in related to the whole frame. So this is my answer to the first part of the question.
Anybody else wants to jump in?
Regarding my research of like death commemoration, I was kind of surprised how people in Iran using social media, particularly Instagram and also Twitter, they could share the news and their own commemoration of others quite free. I wouldn't say free, but kind of I'll say free from state intervention, and they would do it in their personal spaces of their commemoration, and they don't get hindered by the state intervention in their private space relatively than doing it in a public spaces. And how those parents of victims in their generation, I was surprised that they were using quite fluently the social media, and how they share own news. Maybe younger generation help them. And I think there are some commemoration from diasporic community as well, and I have attached many of those commemoration in my presentation, even though I kind of generalized as Iranian, but many of them are from outside of Iran, and they write comments on Instagram real time to each other. And actually, some of the death commemoration did not really get good response from inside Iran, that certain people are making commemoration kind of too loud or too celebratory, rather than reflecting the real spirit of the movement. But I think all those kind of communication are taking place and influencing each other in a certain direction. So, yep.
Anybody else?
Yes, I have some comments.
Please.
So I agree with Gunha as well in terms of the speed of circulation of information and content online. And I think it is, I would say, unique, but maybe it's not so unique to the Iranian diaspora and Iranian society. But I think it is really, yeah, I would say unique. So I haven't seen it in any other diaspora or society. My own, for example, my own country, the people there don't use social media as much as Iranians do, both inside and outside of Iran. So I think it is really important to note. And maybe because of the speed of circulation, I feel like there is always some lag between the Iranians inside the country and outside. And it seems to me like there is the diaspora and Iran still are two different islands with some connections, but I think building these bridges, like more bridges to connect more with the people, would be great. I mean, I wouldn't say that these are not connected, because they are, but they are certain walls, I think, between the diaspora and the Iranian society inside of Iran, which can be felt. I mean, I have seen personally among my friends when they recently left Iran, they were seen as outsiders, but they had been insiders like a month before that. So it's really interesting to see how an Iranian becomes really rapidly an outsider when they move to another country. So that's my comment.
Negar John, please go ahead.
Thank you. So to continue with Eszter's point of the Iranians in diaspora being an outsider or not, I believe, there is a lag, and there is always like a valley between Iranians in diaspora and in Iran. But still, I believe that this movement, Women, Life, Liberty, sort of brought these two together, helped bring these two together by increasing the level of interaction between them. At first you could see, and this is what I witnessed, at first you could see that there was sort of some trust issues still between these two, and they couldn't agree with each other on different points, like you're outside of Iran, why do you care? It's like none of your business. If you cared, you would have stayed in Iran. But as far as I have experienced, I believe these have sort of diminished through, gradually diminished through the unfolding of the movement. But what I can say remains, the trust issue that remains is between the communities that are like activists in diaspora and inside Iran. And I think that still has time to develop. And we have more work to do on that area.
Thank you, Negar. I'm going to read the next question, which is directed at Sara. Sara Jan, Puria Safaran is asking, and I'm quoting here, I have two questions for Sara. One, have you considered the relationship between Anahita, the Iranian equivalent of Eszter, and the slogan Women, Life, Liberty? Etymologically, Anahita means unbounded or free, and is also the goddess of fertility. More than this, Anahita is the mother of Mitra, which I think somewhat captures the slogan Man, Homeland, Prosperity. This brings me to my second question. Is Man, Homeland, Prosperity a recent insertion, or is it seen in early Kurdish movements as well?
Yes, thank you for asking this question. This is a very interesting question. I have not considered Anahita when I was encountering with this, with Eszter, the goddess, but I'm not sure in what sense you are really addressing that. Have I mean, thought of this? In what sense? In what way you mean? If you could clarify that, that would be helpful. About Mard Mihan Abadi, to the far that I went through different websites, the medias, news, magazines, and things like that, or different platforms, I haven't encountered any history about Mard Mihan Abadi coming from, Kurdish background. However, my understanding is that because many men also sacrificed for this cause, for restoring women's, women's recognition, restoring women's rights, determination, things like that, women liberation. I think that was maybe, in my opinion, a way to add this to this mythology that we are going to create out of this movement, because there is a huge attention, as the photos that my teammates, my colleagues like Leila and other presenters, they shared, there is a huge attention and concentration on creating a new national myth through Mahsa Amini, not in the Kurdish, it's outside, it's the general society of Iran. Mard Mihan Abadi can be part of that, adding some sort of element and remembrance of the sacrifice of men, because there are huge number of men who was also, killed or arrested or tortured in this project or process. I'm curious to know, where does this question of Anahita as equivalent of goddess come from? Because it is true that, back to first question, it is true that the goddess like Eszter, where it's a Mesopotamian kind of thing, but many of these figures, or goddess, or these values or these beliefs have been shared in ancient Iranian, because the borders did not exist back then. And the other thing I really, I would like to add to this is that the Kurdish, because, I know we have Iranian Kurdish community or society, we have like Turks, we have Iraqi or Arabian. But these, when we look at the culture, especially when we look at the very Kurdish language, it has Indo-European background, right, roots. And when we listen to their, for example, in Persian we say Lalai, the very folk music, in addition to the song and different cultural thing, it is, to me, it is more organic, it is more original compared to what we have in, let's say, Persian modern literature. I think it kept its Iranian or Persian elements in a more pure way compared to the general society, regardless if they switch to some goddess like Eszter or I don't know, something like that, or if we say, oh, okay, of course, some of them are speaking Arabic. Especially when I started with the figure of Kaveh. So we see that this nationalist myth is more highlighted in the culture compared to general Iranian society. One reason could be because it's a minority, there are ethnic minority in Iran, they were more protected to preserve their cultural value, and especially Iranian element can be more common in their system of value and cultural things rather than Iranian. That's what I wanted to share about the Anahita stuff, but yeah, that's all. If anybody else has have more idea, I'm happy to hear.
Since the questions were finished, Sara Jan, and you were asking for more clarifications, I unmuted them, like I unmuted the chat, and so Puriya Zafaran, if you want to add to the question for Sara, you can unmute yourself and continue the question.
Yes, thank you so much, Shabnam.
Of course.
Yeah, so I was Sara Salam. I was making that connection because you kind of mentioned that in the early Kurdish nationalist movements, by identifying with Eszter, or in tandem with identification with Eszter, this slogan of woman, life, liberty arose. Am I getting that right? Instead of identifying with Kaveh.
No, it was the background, it was the social and political atmosphere and background that emerged the coming of a slogan like that later, because the switch, the shift, from Kaveh to Eszter first happened. Then gradually we see the slogan Zhen, Zhian, Azadi.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So I guess my question isn't really relevant to your.
Okay. Well, it was an interesting question, though. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much, Sara.
Lots of thank you supporting for you guys. And thankfully they're all on the chat. You can see them. But I don't see any more questions. If I missed anybody's question, please unmute yourself and ask it from our speakers. Otherwise, I would ask our speakers if they have any final remarks. And we'll conclude the meeting after that.
Thank you, Shabnam Jam. I just want to say thank you, many thanks to you, Professor Tawakkoli and Leila Zhen.
Thank you for Professor Tawakkoli, who actually gave me this thought, to organize this symposium. Thank you.
I'm just going to add that this has been on everybody's radar and kind of everybody that presented at our events, and everybody else who's kind of doing this kind of work around each other and doing research. So thank you, Leila, and thank you, Dr. Talkali, but mostly thank you, Leila, for kind of putting this together and getting everybody to kind of do this after all of the hectic work of the course that you guys all had to do in the past semester. I've been witness to it, so kudos to all of you.
And I just want to especially thank to who just came to our session and listened to us. This is really great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our presenters, and thank you for joining us. And hopefully, we'll see you on our next session. Thank you all.
Thank you.